Oh, hello, and welcome to the Fantasy Inferno. And this week we are talking our overvalued players in Redraft. I'm Rob Silvers. You can find me at RotoHeatRob. And before we get to the co-hosts, we're going to introduce our guest today. Joining us on the phone, Mr. Brad Menendez. So, Brad, how are you doing? Fantastic. All right. Well, Sully, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing real well. Thank you for asking. Honored to have Mr. Menendez join us and talk about these players today. It's going to be a fun show.
All right, Bryce, how's it going?
Doing pretty well. Thanks for asking. Definitely excited to talk about this topic. There's a lot of players I had in mind, so I narrowed down to my biggest three. So I'm just can't wait to get started.
All right. Again, we're talking our overrated players in Redraft tonight, but we want to remind you, watching this live on YouTube or listening on the podcast platform, please like and subscribe to the Fantasy Inferno and RotoHeat. But before we get into our topic here, let's talk about some news. And the big one, Delvin Harmon tearing his ACL. He was kind of a popular talking point last night on the Heat Seekers, as were a lot of Washington Redskins. And he tears his ACL, and it creates maybe some opportunity for some other young guys on a pretty young offense. Sully, what do you think there?
I think it's bad news for Mr. Harmon. I really liked how he was kind of coming on towards the end of last season. Seemed to coincide with Haskins coming on a little bit as well. So Terry McLaurin obviously is probably the number one benefactor of targets. But I also think he's the number one benefactor of every team in the NFL double covering him from the start of the game to the end of the game. So it might not work out as well as some think. Is it Steven Sims? Is that the other young guy that's running around there? I liked what he was doing towards the end of last year. But you know what? That's a team that ran the ball a heck of a lot last year. And I think they might have to do that a little bit more than they initially had planned this year as well. So bad news for Harmon. I don't know what is... You know, he's a guy that was really projected pretty highly coming into the draft, fell all the way through the draft, and then didn't do much in his rookie season, and now he's had this. So, I don't know, Bryce, what do you think this means for the Washington, D.C. football club?
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. It definitely sucks for a younger player that had the opportunity to come and show what he's got more in this upcoming season. Terry McLaurin is definitely their number one go-to guy, but it's always good to have a number two person there, and the Redskins don't have a set number two, and it seems like he was going to take that spot for them. It doesn't probably do much for our discussions in redraft because he wouldn't be a guy that would be looked at in many leagues, but it does hurt a lot of dynasty owners that maybe were getting excited about a potential talent there. So what do you think, Menendez?
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Well, I think it locks Antonio Gandy-Golden into that starting role as that Z wide receiver. But that offense is probably not going to be great. So I think there's a lot of upside there. But whether they all click and start performing, that's the question. The other news that dropped, and maybe the bigger news and what we should have started with, is Derrick Henry getting that contract extension today and right before the wire. 4 years, $50 million, 25.5 guaranteed. Big deal for him, and the Titans have now locked up both Tannehill and Derrick Henry, I believe, both for the next 4 years. Bryce, you got anything to say on your boy Derrick Henry?
I was real big on Derrick Henry last year. I'll be talking about him later, but I think the contract's good for him. I doubt Titans fans some might be excited because he's an extremely fun player to watch. He's very he's a old school running back. He's big, he's fast, and he's strong. And the Titans fan base probably would like to see him there, but that takes up a lot of cap space for them to fill some much needed holes overall in their team. That's a lot of money to pay a running back, especially one that's not that young. He's entering his fifth or sixth year coming up. So it doesn't seem like it's worked out for a lot of teams when they pay running backs that old for that many years, because at the end of this contract he's going to be 30 years old, and that's when you see a heavy decline, which I think you're going to start to see this year anyway. So I think for Derrick Henry it's good, and for Titans fans they're probably happy to see him come back, but I don't know if the organization overall benefits from that. What do you think, Sully?
I think Silvers has got his hands full of his dog there, for one. I don't know. I am not a fan of paying running backs. I understand that Derrick Henry he's the MVP of that offense, and he probably will be in 2020 as well. You now have $116.5 million guaranteed to Tannehill and Henry combined. Derrick Henry's the fifth highest paid running back in the NFL. He's entering his age 26 season, and he's coming off a season which, if you include the playoffs, he had over 400 touches last year. So he is a big guy. He continues to he's sort of strange. He gets a little stronger as the season goes on, but I do think that workload catches up with him down the road. I think this year he'll be okay, but into 2021 and beyond, I'd start to worry a little bit. I haven't seen the real fine details of that deal. I don't know if there's a lot of signing bonus money or roster bonus money, if it's front loaded or back loaded, but if it's just simply 12.5 across the 5 years, I think Tennessee will learn to, or will start to regret that down the road, but we'll be happy with it in the early years. Brad? Absolutely. Yeah. Maybe my partner will stop yelling at me about it now. That's good.
Well, the one thing I find interesting, I think Derrick Henry's a different runner than a lot of guys we've seen, and so I don't know how to really judge it for him. But since 2017, I was reading on a Twitter thread today, just one running back has had a 1,000-yard rushing season in his age 26 season. That was C.J. Anderson, and in the last 4 years, and since 2010, just 4 running backs have had multiple 1,000-yard seasons, age 26 and beyond, and they were Marshawn Lynch, Jamal Charles, Mark Ingram, and I'm going brain dead. I can't remember the fourth one. No, it was LaShawn McCoy. So Lynch, McCoy, Charles, and Ingram. And he's obviously a different runner than all of them, so it's hard to say what exactly is going to happen. Closest comparison that thread also gave to him was Brandon Jacobs, who actually sustained pretty good success for 2 years after turning 26. They're the only 2 guys who are 6'2" and over 240 pounds in NFL history to have rushed for 1,000 yards. So, and he ran for 800 yards back-to-back years after turning 26. So, hard to say. I think I think it's a good move for the Titans. It's better than him going somewhere else, in my opinion. Any other franchise tag news? Obviously, Dak didn't get a deal in the closing minutes. Sounds like they had one on the table, though, but it was just too close to the wire to get that finalized. Any other thoughts on franchise tag guys for any of you? Brad, how about we start with you? Got any franchise tag news that you saw today? Well, you had one of your big guys, right? In IDP, Chris Jones got a nice deal earlier today.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. And Brad, if you can maybe try to turn up your mic a little bit, I'm being told. And oh, okay. No problem. Sully, how about you? Any thoughts on the other franchise tag players?
Just Dak, really. I'm kind of like Brad. I was surprised by the Derrick Henry deal. I really thought the Cowboys would work something out with Prescott. They totally screwed up the Dak Prescott contract it probably goes back 3 years now. So, Dak's going to play on the tag. He's going to be a $31.5 million quarterback. And the contract negotiations next year are going to start with him at 37, and I think it's 37.5 because that's what his tag will be the year after that. And if he goes 3 tags, then he's making something like $54 million. So that's not going to happen. I think Dak's played this perfectly, and his camp has as well. It's sort of the Kirk Cousins, parallel, both later round drafted quarterbacks, both sort of not really overly respected with contract offers. And Dak's gonna come out of this just fine, especially if the Cowboys want to keep him as their quarterback. And I guess the other guys franchise tag worthy of mentioning are Hunter Henry, which I didn't expect anything to happen with his sort of injury history, and AJ Green, who, in my opinion, should thank his lucky stars that they gave him that franchise tag, because 18 plus is pretty darn nice.
Especially for a guy who hasn't played in a year
and a half.
Yeah.
Bryce, thoughts?
Yeah, right. I agree with what he said on Dak. I thought he was going to hold out. I think holding out or not signing a deal. Sorry, not holding out. Not signing a deal does also show maybe his confidence that he is going to continue to perform at a high level. Because if you don't perform at a high level, that contract isn't going to come the next year. So I don't know how Cowboys. I'm sure Cowboys fans are indifferent about it because they're excited to see him there, but they would like to see him there long term. But him not signing that deal does kind of force him to be playing at a high level to make sure he gets paid in the future.
What was the deal that he turned down? Because I heard there was that Dak wants a 4-year extension. The Cowboys want to take him to 5, and there was $100 million guarantee.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, he wants 4 and no 5.
Because even the 2 years on tags is almost $70 million. So I don't know why he would go 5 years guaranteed for 100. But anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not too sure either. I saw it was like 33.5 to 34.5, but I didn't get a chance to read too much about what else was in that final offer that came through this afternoon right before the deadline.
He was offered 5-year, $175 million extension, and then $45 million for a 5th-year potential offer. I don't see what the guarantee was though.
So the sticking point probably still him wanting 4 years.
Yeah, I know that was his biggest issue is he only wanted to stay 4.
Well, and you use that Derrick Henry contract as an example, and it's not the same thing. But Dallas signed the wrong guy last year. They signed everybody but Dak. Really, some guys on the defensive side. They signed Cooper and Zeke, and they missed out on the most important piece. So we'll see how it plays out.
For sure. All right, moving into our topic today. As we said, it's our overrated players in redraft. And let's start with the guy who was our preview image. Bryce, why don't you take us away?
Yeah, we already just talked about him, but Derrick Henry is ranked running back 6, and then his ADP value is 7. Now, if you're going off last year's stats, that's pretty plausible. He ended up, I believe, running back 5 last year and had a great second half of the season. But with a guy like that, especially in PPR formats, it's hard to imagine that he can continue to handle that same workload, especially since most of his points are coming strictly from rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. Sometimes leagues that get points per carry or partial points per carry, he even has a little more value, but that's, again, that you don't see that much. Having him running back 6 just seems a bit high, especially in PPR formats. He's above a lot of guys that are also proven that I feel like could have, higher value than him just based on what they can do in the pass game. Guys like Joe Mixon, Austin Eckler, Aaron Jones, in my opinion. Those are guys that can do it all, and I feel like are more safe options, especially since they're not going to be force-fed and teams aren't going to know what's coming at him. Like Sully said earlier, he's the main guy in that offense. So teams are going to come in and week out and focus on the Titans' run game. So having him ranked 6 to me is a bit high for that reason. What do you think, Sully?
I'm really torn on this one, and my thought is that he is overvalued. And then I look at my rankings and I have him ranked 6th. So where I struggle with him is not so much the running back 6, it's the 7th overall, I think, is the part that sticks with me. The Titans were ridiculously efficient last year. I think that they converted in the red zone over 75%, which led the league by over 10%. Green Bay was second at around 67%. And the last 5-6 games of the year, they were up over 80%. The Titans attempted 18 field goals last year. So I don't see the offense being nearly as efficient. I see that offense in general regressing. I don't think Derrick Henry scores 18 total touchdowns this year either. And the other thing that makes me think he's overvalued, especially in the PPR format, is he had 18 receptions last year, and that was his career high. So he's a beast. He's a great running back. I really struggle with where to value him. I just don't see him as being worthy of that 7th overall pick in the draft, but I don't have a lot to really hammer home that point. It's just more a lot of gut feel of regression.
I feel like his value is better in this case when we're talking redraft than that same kind of value would be if he was in Dynasty, again because of that pass catching, but he can just blow up. The part I feel is going to be hard to repeat besides the touchdowns is the 5.1 yards per carry. I mean, averaging 5 yards per carry in the NFL is not an easy feat. And I think it was almost more once Tannehill took over last year, the perfect storm where they all of a sudden had a passing offense that could beat you a little bit, where just made that running game better, and it just made them all better. I mean, if you think when Mariota was starting, I mean, there was nothing special about the Titans. But when Tannehill came in, it kind of gave them another wrinkle, and it opened things up. And I think now with time to adjust, I just don't see any way to repeat any of those numbers, as you guys have been saying. Brad, your thoughts on Mr. Derrick Henry?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys are right. I think it's expected some regression just because of last year was huge for him, but when I was reading over the show notes and looking over what you guys were going to talk about tonight, I started thinking about who are some guys that kind of came out around the time Derrick Henry did, and the first big name that came to my mind was a guy like Zeke. So I started saying, okay, what kind of stats has Zeke had and what kind of workload has he had? And really, outside of a 2018 season where he had 77 receptions, his first couple years in the league, Zeke didn't have a ton of receptions. He was mostly rushing. The last 2 years in the league, he got a little bit more involved in the passing game, but his yards per carry average was below Derrick Henry's both years. In 2018, he had 4.7 yards, and last year he only had 4.5, where Henry's only gotten better. He went from 4.9 to 5.1. And he's only had 800 carries in his career, where Zeke's had, 1,200 carries. I'm not saying that they're, I'm just using them as kind of examples in talking, but, I expect a regression, but I think that, Derrick Henry can still be kind of a RB1 this year. But the way that he runs, I expect him to get hurt sooner rather than later for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would kind of, counter that a little bit. Not that you're wrong. I'm saying you're wrong by any means, but you think about the first 2 years for Ezekiel Elliott, he had what was considered the best offensive line in the NFL. And then the last 2 years, the first year, Travis Frederick was basically on the pup the whole season. And then last year, he pretty much retired, due to his medical condition. And so that's made that offensive line step back, where Tennessee's offensive line was getting better. But now they've lost Taylor Lewan. And what is that going to do for that offensive line? I don't know. either on that front. So it'll be interesting to see how he bounces back from that loss of a key guy compared to how Elliott did.
Conklin's gone too, right?
Yeah, it's Conklin that's
Yep.
gone, not Lawan. But I knew who he meant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Conklin. Yep.
The right, not the left.
Yeah.
But you were there.
Yeah. I got you. Yeah. And now that you say that, yep, that makes sense. Right side is where he runs most of the time too, is it not? So that's another thing. That's one of his guys out blocking for him. I feel like I remember he runs a lot more to the right than to the left side of that line.
Well, Conklin's a much better run blocker than Lawan, so that wouldn't surprise me.
All right. Moving on to our second guy. Sully, who do you have for us?
My first overvalued player is the 2019 NFL's most valuable player, Lamar Jackson, currently ADP 21, going as quarterback 1 overall. The dude had an unbelievable season last year, obviously set the record, the NFL record for rushing yards in a season. Tons of touchdown passes and looked unstoppable. Where I see it is, it's a couple of things. Number one, it's just too early and overvalued in a one quarterback format to take a quarterback. And I look at his rushing and what the Ravens look like they're doing. I can't imagine they want their franchise star elite quarterback running the ball as much as he did last year. So I see the rushing yards scaling back. And he threw, what was it? I got it written down here, 36 touchdown passes on 265 completions. So he ranked 26th in completions, 27th in attempts, and first in touchdown passes last year. So it's natural to say that that's going to regress considerably as well. So don't get me wrong. I love Lamar Jackson. In my mind, if you're going into your draft and you want one of the big two, be it Mahomes or Jackson, just wait till one goes and then take your quarterback. But I am not taking him at 21, and therefore I feel he is overvalued to his ADP.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. I think that's going to be very hard to repeat. The one thing I like for Lamar Jackson is I feel like they improved the team around him. I feel like Devin Duvernay is an improvement. I feel like a running back tandem of Mark Ingram and J.K. Dobbins, with still having Gus Edwards there as your bulldozer, is an improvement over, tandeming just Ingram and Edwards. And so I feel like the weapons have gotten better, which makes me think he's not necessarily going to fall off too much.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely always tough in a redraft for me to take a quarterback that high, unless you somehow have a super flex redraft going on.
Yeah, for sure. I do think he increases his passing statistics for sure. But you look at his standard sort of scoring league, you don't gain nearly as many points throwing the ball as you do running the ball. So that's why I see him coming back a bit. Bryce, what do you think?
I would even devalue him more if it's a 6-point passing touchdown league, because he doesn't throw the ball as much.
I'd agree with that as well.
Bryce?
Yeah, I would agree. Especially the way I kind of play redraft is I take whatever's left when it comes to the quarterback position. But it's hard to imagine Lamar. It's kind of similar to the Derrick Henry situation, where it's hard to imagine they do better than the year before. You can say the same thing about Christian McCaffrey. They're still going to do good, and they're still going to be a top tier player at their position, but they're going to still be they're overvalued for where they were last year. People, kind of forget that, you don't just repeat year in and year out, and you kind of draft players based on what they did the previous year. And a lot of people doing that with Lamar are going to, in my opinion as well, are going to end up kind of regretting it a little bit, because there's no way that he's going to rush for as many yards and as many touchdowns as he did this past year. How many rushing touchdowns did he get? Didn't he have over double digits, right? Did he have like 12 or something like that? So it's going to be, and that's a lot of points, especially in PPR format. He was getting a lot of yards. And like you said, I don't think Baltimore is going to want their franchise quarterback to continue to run that much and put himself at risk. Maybe another reason why they address the running back position. That team loves to run the ball. They run it all the way down into the red zone, and then they do a little play action and dump it to the tight end or Hollywood Brown across the middle, it seems like. So I agree that Lamar Jackson is overrated, but he's still a top-tier quarterback.
Well, and he had 7 rushing touchdowns. It was 1,200 yards he ran for.
That's right.
But,
Yeah, 1,200 yards.
Yeah, and the other point to that, though, is let's just say he regresses to quarterback 5. You're taking him at 21. That's the end of round 2. Deshaun Watson currently is going off at quarterback 5 at pick 64. That's the start of the 6th round. That's a huge difference. If you lose 4 rounds in quarterback value, that can be detrimental to your team.
His leg's going to have to fall off for him to fall all the way to QB5, though, I think.
That's why I stay away from the quarterback position unless it's Pat Mahomes. He's the only person I'd feel 100% confident you're gonna draft him for his value.
Brad, thoughts on this Lamar Jackson character?
I don't blame anybody that wants to take him that high. I was just looking at the one redraft I've done so far, which is the shirt Sully's wearing, the fishbowl. Even in that, which is more superflex focused, I still didn't draft a quarterback until pick 40. The quarterback position, there's so many valuable assets that you can use later. Even think about, some of the guys that may not be as sexy in names, your Matt Ryans, Matt Staffords, guys like that. You can get those guys way later and still, get good value out of them. The interesting thing for Lamar is, everyone talks about him not being the best passer. Still completed 66% of his passes last year. Really, the only issue was he only had 3,000 yards passing, but he had 36 passing touchdowns, 7 rushing touchdowns, 1,200 yards. I mean, I'm not expecting his stats to regress, but I'm not expecting the value to be there. 21 is just too high to take a quarterback, especially when you look at some of the other guys that are sitting there around him. You've got high-end wide receivers that are coming off the board after him, and it's like, I would rather, a Mike Evans or a Kenyon Drake or an Eckler or Cooper. There's a lot of guys that I'd rather instead of him at 21. So I don't hate the argument that you guys are pushing that he's definitely not worth the value. But if somebody really wants to shoot that high, I'd rather wait 2 picks and get Mahomes. I know Mahomes was hurt a little bit last year, so I expect his numbers to be higher. Where Lamar, I think we've probably seen the ceiling.
Agree.
Interesting that Brad just brought up Mike Evans because that is our next valued player. He's the first guy on my list coming in at 25 and wide receiver 8 on the ADP. My thought here is Tom Brady is getting up there. He's signing a 2-year deal to kind of go out with a bang maybe in Tampa Bay. But has Tom Brady really ever supported not only a potential top tight end, but 2 top wide receivers in a single season? So what's got to give? We know oh my goodness, I cannot speak tonight. Rob Gronkowski has a long history with Tom Brady. I think we've all talked about Chris Godwin feels more that Julian Edelman type role. So what does that leave for Mike Evans? I'm not worried that Tom Brady can't get the ball deep to him. I'm just worried how much passing is actually in that offense, how much volume is there to go around, and who ends up, leading that pecking order. And just wide receiver 8 seems way too high to me for Mike Evans. When you're talking about having Chris Godwin at wide receiver 6 and Rob Gronkowski at tight end 7. I just don't see how that's all going to mesh together for all 3 of them to have that good a year. Bryce, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree completely. Actually, like I said earlier, I had a lot of guys in mind, and Chris Godwin was the guy I had in mind of putting down on the list because, I've watched Brady for as long as I've been watching football. I'm a huge Patriots fan, and I'm actually kind of happy to see him there in Tampa Bay because I'd like to see what he does without Belichick. But he loves to spread the ball around, and that's extremely well known. Rob Gronkowski came in there specifically to vulture touchdowns in the red zone, to give that team that extra edge down in scoring position. And like you said, what gives? That whole offense I feel like is almost a question mark when it comes to the passing game because you have no clue who Tom Brady's going to form a relationship with first. He's showed in his career time in and time out, except for maybe Randy Moss, that talent is not necessarily his go-to. He finds who he has the biggest relationship with, and he exploits it with timing and off season practice and things like that. He gets the timing down and he takes advantage of the holes in defenses and games, especially in zone defenses. He'll pick teams apart this year with that offense. So the thing is, I don't know who he's going to use, and I'm not gambling, especially in redraft league, on who I think he's going to form a bond with. So I'm staying away from almost all of them, but I would completely agree that Mike Evans is overrated. His talent's not overrated, but his value in PPR redraft league is a little high for me. What do you think, Sully?
Yeah, it's a little high of an ADP. Mike Evans is unbelievable though, and he is going to eat in the red zone in the offense as well. I don't really feel as though Gronk is going to be the Gronk of old. I think he's definitely there for a reason, and I think he's going to catch some passes. Probably majority of his damage will be done in the red zone, but Brady can get the ball downfield. I don't buy into any of that stuff. He proved last year that he didn't have anybody to throw the ball downfield to, because the only game that he had AB for, I think he hit him twice pretty far down the field, one of them for a touchdown. So he can throw the ball. Godwin's definitely going to get some. I'd see more Godwin sliding back a little bit. I think he had a little bit inflated season last year. I don't know. I like 7 is high. I do. He's a top 12 wide receiver still for me. So if I'm on the clock in my draft and I want Mike Evans, if I'm not going to take him at 7, I'm probably not going to get him. So I'm probably going to have to pull the trigger there. And Rob, your question about when Brady could support, when has he had the opportunity, or when he's supported 2 wide receivers and a tight end? My question is, when has he had 2 wide receivers and a tight end? Because other than Randy Moss and Gronkowski, like Brandon LaFell, who else did he have, Bryce?
It was probably more he had 2 tight ends and a wide receiver. That was probably more what he had when he had Gronk, Hernandez and Moss. But
before Hernandez had his off-field stuff, for sure. But no, I very much like Derrick Henry. I struggle with Mike Evans. I really like the player. I really like this offense. It's very unknown, and obviously this offseason being what it is, nobody knows anything about anything, so it adds to the complexity of it. Ultimately, I think if you want Mike Evans, you're going to have to take him where he is. What do you think, Brad?
Oh, this is a tough one. When you look at Tampa last year, I mean, they had like 600-plus pass attempts, but it was because they were in shootouts or playing from behind or Jameis was making bad decisions. So, trying to think about Arians' offenses in the past and how many attempts they really have, it's hard to think about how they're really going to spread that ball around because Arians likes to get the ball to the running backs. I mean, Ogunbowale had like 40 or 50, targets, and Rojo had a couple, and Peyton had some, and it's like I think everybody has to be downgraded a little bit when it comes to who you're drafting because they're like the Cleveland Browns. They have so many talented options. It's like, okay, who's really going to be number 1? Mike Evans is my favorite receiver on that team, but I'm not drafting him where you were seeing him in ADP just because I want to make sure whoever I'm starting into wide receiver 1 is going to get nice amount of targets each week, 8 to 12 or more. And I don't know that Evans can do that because I don't expect Tampa to be playing from behind very often. It's going to be such a good offense, and Brady's such a smart quarterback. He's not going to throw, 31 interceptions or whatever like Jameis did. So it's going to be, they're going to have more ground control and more running attempts. And I agree with you guys. It's hard to really think anybody's going to really exceed expectations, especially in year 1.
Agree.
All right. So I think we're going to reverse it going back the other way. Just stay with me and stay with Tampa Bay. My second guy we've kind of talked about a little bit, Rob Gronkowski, coming in at tight end 7. He's the 75th player off the board, so the beginning of the 7th round. It just doesn't make sense to me. He's coming back from, a year off plus injuries. I know he's got a connection with Brady, and there's going to be some value there, but this year feels like tight end is the deepest. I mean, I started playing fantasy football when I was like 13, 14 back in the early 2000s, and I don't know if I've ever seen the tight end position so deep. You know, you look at the guys going around 20, 18, 19, 20, 21. You have Blake Jarwin, Eric Ebron, and Chris Herndon. Some of these guys are going, I mean, they're all basically going undrafted in a lot of redraft leagues, and they all have a chance to outproduce Rob Gronkowski. I mean, Blake Jarwin has flash. He got paid to be a big-time tight end. Chris Herndon had a great rookie season for a tight end. Obviously missed last year because of injury. And Eric Ebron, you know, the hope is that he could maybe bounce back and have something kind of magical like he had with Andrew Luck, with Ben Roethlisberger, who hasn't for a number of years now used a tight end, but he's also been with Heath Miller for out a number of years, and Eric Ebron's the closest thing to Heath Miller. I mean, any of those three guys at 19, 20, 21 could finish in the top 8, maybe even top 6 at tight end. And so why am I going to spend a 7th-round draft capital on Rob Gronkowski, coming off a year off, coming off years of injuries, even though he's got a connection with Tom Brady? That's just way too high for me. Brad, thoughts on Rob Gronkowski?
I want nothing to do with Rob Gronkowski. Like, I'm just not touching that. If this was a wrestling fantasy draft, I mean, maybe I'd take him because he's winning titles in the wrestling world, but I'm not touching him here. I mean, think about all the guys that are behind him. You know, you can get Hawkinson and Jonnu Smith and any of the guys you mentioned, Hayden Hurst. I mean, there's so many other options that, you know, I don't see as a glorified decoy. I mean, people are going to get worried because it's Gronk, but, you know, like you guys said, Gronk hasn't been Gronk in years. So I loved him on Masked Singer. He's got some great dance moves, but I'm not touching him in redraft.
Sully, thoughts?
Also loved him on Masked Singer. Did a heck of a good job. I have him as my tight end 10 this year. And I guess I'll try to make the argument somewhat for Rob Gronkowski. I agree. At where he's at, it's too rich for my blood. But Rob Gronkowski didn't leave things like the Masked Singer and whatever the heck his title was in the WWE to come back to get his head pounded in 16, 17 weeks of the year for nothing. He came back, and he's not in Tampa Bay to block either. So he's going to be targeted. We just talked about how we don't really know what's going on in that offense. That's the one piece we do sort of know. And I'll also play the devil's advocate of what a year off must have done for his body and how he's probably feeling a heck of a lot better than he has at this point in time in any year and probably since he came into the league. So I do think that he's still going to be very fantasy relevant. I do agree with you as well, Rob, that from tight end probably 23 up to maybe the top 4 guys, it's going to be very interchangeable on a week-to-week basis. Tight end has 3 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown, and they go from tight end 20 to tight end 4. So it's very volatile. So it's hard to peg a guy exactly in that range. You know, to like it to Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes, if I don't have Travis Kelce or George Kittle or maybe Mark Andrews, I don't really care who I have at tight end. So I agree he's overvalued, but I think his value is still a top 12 tight end, if that makes any sense. Bryce?
Yeah, makes great sense.
Yeah, I don't know how to feel about this because the way I agree with you guys where I feel like you can get guys of similar value much later in fantasy or in redraft leagues. You know, guys like Blake Jarwin. You know, that's a guy I'm actually targeting in a lot of leagues this year. Last year for me it was Darren Waller, so that actually worked out. But I don't hate Gronk's rankings among his tight ends, but I don't like his ADP. Because I do see, like Sully said, that's the one piece we know. I think Rob Gronkowski went to Tampa Bay to catch touchdowns and not block. So I can see him not, you know, like he said, it probably did a lot for his body. I bet he comes into this season, you know, maybe 15, 20 pounds less than he did when he was playing in New England. So I see, you know, and blocking takes a wear on your you know, it puts wear and tear on your limbs and things like that and your tendons. So he came there to have fun. I think the reason he left New England so early, like, you know, young, was he took a beating in the previous years and he saw what that offense was looking like going into this final year. And he wasn't wanting to be the number 1 target and getting targeted 10 to 12 times a game and just keep getting beat up in it, you know, year in and year out. He talked about in an interview once of how like mentally exhausting it is to where you get injured and you finally get healed and you're excited and then you get re-injured. So that took a wear on his body and it actually almost put him in tears. So I'm excited to see him this upcoming season, but his ADP value is too high. I'm not taking him in the 7th round. I'm going to wait later. If for some reason he drops that late, great. But if not, I'll be perfectly happy getting a guy like Johnny Smith, Blake Jarwin, even Mike Gesicki.
All right. We want to remind everybody, get your questions in. We'll be answering those after our main subject. But Sully, who's your number 2 guy on your overvalued list?
All right, here we go. Number 2 is Aaron Jones, running back of the Green Bay Packers, current ADP 16, coming off the board as running back 11. So he finished as the RB2 overall in PPR scoring last year, broke out at an amazing year. There's 3 reasons why I feel that he's in for some pretty big regression in the upcoming season. Number 1, Aaron Jones scored 19 touchdowns last year. He will not score 19 touchdowns this year. The Green Bay Packers, for reasons known only to themselves, grabbed a running back in the 2nd round who I believe they fully intend on putting on the field and fully intend on putting on the field predominantly around the goal line. He's a big body back, and I think A.J. Dillon can do some damage in there. And the 3rd and probably the biggest reason why I think he's going to regress is what I call the Devontae Adams factor. So Adams missed 4 games last year, and Aaron Jones put up 38% of his fantasy production in those games. He had 22 catches for 285 yards and 3 touchdowns, which was 45% of his receptions, 60% of his yards, and 100% of his receiving touchdowns, while Adams was out. And more to the Dillon factor is Jamal Williams missed 1 game last year. Aaron Jones scored 5 times. Lost in this great breakout season that he had last year was he was under 9 PPR points in 5 games. His head coach has spoken on numerous occasions of wanting more than 2 running backs in his offense. His mentor is Kyle Shanahan, and we've seen what Kyle Shanahan has done. He'd much rather have 3 running backs that have 100 carries than 1 running back that has 300 carries. So I don't hate Aaron Jones, but I have him at running back 16, and I think he's going to disappoint very many fans that draft him where he's at in the redraft leagues. Bryce, let's go.
I agree. I agree that he is due for some regression. It's going to be hard to, get the same amount of touchdowns that he did, and he did. I noticed that he did perform better without Devontae Adams. I love Aaron Jones, though. I have him in a lot of leagues. And I watch him play, and he's super talented. He's a very talented running back, and Aaron Rodgers loves him. And as long as Aaron Rodgers is on the field, he's going to demand that Aaron Jones is on the field. But I don't think he's underrated whatsoever, or overrated whatsoever. If anything, I think he's a little underrated. You said running back 13 he's ranked, but there's at least 4. I have him in the top 7 this upcoming year for redraft. I do think that the Packers drafted a running back for the future. I don't think it's a guy that's going to be getting much opportunity this upcoming season. Might vulture a few touchdowns here and there. If Aaron Jones gets hurt, he's going to have tremendous value. But Aaron Jones stays healthy, and he was running back 2 last year. And to drop 10 spots for this upcoming season seems almost criminally low to me. But I still have him as a top 10 running back, being a high, almost another high end running back 1. I personally have him in the top 5, but I can see how a lot of people disagree with that. But again, in redraft, I love him, but in dynasty leagues, I would probably steer clear of him.
All right, Brad, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Aaron Jones is kind of a microcosm of the entire team. Like, the Green Bay last year had a lot of lucky breaks in games, and I expect that whole offense to regress. The secret that nobody will tell you is that Aaron Rodgers is slipping. He's not as good as he once was, and he continues to get worse. I expect their strength of schedule is tougher this year. The only saving grace is that the Vikings are a dumpster fire right now, trying to figure out how to fix that defense. And the fact that Detroit and Chicago suck too. So somebody's got to win the North, and it probably will be Green Bay by defunct. But I don't think the way that offense runs, it's just so weird and clunky that I don't trust any of those running backs to really be an RB1 week to week. And if that's not the case, I'm not touching, a guy who's right outside the RB1 numbers, at least, not at 13.
I'm a Packer fan, and in redraft, I'm not hitching my wagon to any Packers because I don't trust any of them. As you were saying, Brad, I think Aaron Jones is going to regress. I think A.J. Dillon ends up being a Jag. I didn't think he was special on tape. I mean, I know he had great athleticism at the combine, but he's not going to be very good in my opinion. But he will steal some goal line touchdowns because of size. And if Aaron Jones doesn't get the touchdowns, that's going to hurt his value. If he goes down to 7 touchdowns, which is, I think, within the realm of possibility, I mean, his value tanks. Sully, you had something to add there.
I was just going to say, could A.J. Dillon be the Packers version of LeGarrette Blount? Like, could he literally be a guy that, and not the Detroit Lions version of Blount, that was embarrassing, but the guy who, what did Blount score? Like, he scored almost 20 touchdowns that one year, did he not? And I think his longest touchdown run was 6 yards, right? So, and A.J. Dillon is not going to do that. But to your point, Rob, if A.J. Dillon scores 5 times and Jamal Williams scores once and Rodgers has Adams for a full season instead of missing him for 4 games, and somehow Devin Funchess is reborn and Jace Sternberger can do something, there's just a little bit more diversity in that offense than there was a year ago. And I do think it slides back a little bit. I also sadly agree that they're probably going to win that division again. But I just think, Jones is up against it if he's going to try to repeat what he's done from the previous season is all.
Agreed. All right. Bryce, your second player tonight.
All right. So my second, before I talk about it, you said you're a Packers fan and it sucks to be, for fantasy football, you're steering clear. Imagine being a Patriot fan. There's literally nobody to get excited about.
Hey, I've been a Vikings fan my whole life. What are you guys complaining about? A Patriots fan's complaining to a Vikings and a Packers fan.
I'm just saying for fantasy.
And our guest star's a Lions fan. Like, you guys need to zip that right now.
Yeah. You guys just hold my drink, all right?
Seriously.
All right. My second guy is Miles Sanders. He was ranked, I believe, he was ranked ADP of 18 and running back 11. So Miles Sanders came off a pretty, a solid rookie year. He averaged 4.6 yards a carry. He only got 3 touchdowns though, but he didn't get his footing till late in the year, which is where he was doing most of his damage in the middle to late of the year. But I still think that's definitely too high when you're talking about redraft leagues. Now, if we're talking about dynasty leagues, I think that value is okay. I still would probably think he's a little bit lower, but in redraft leagues, I could see him taking a little step forward, but I don't see that offense taking a big step forward. They still don't have a clear-cut, I'm not sold on Carson Wentz really being that great of a quarterback. Their wide receiver core is not really that good. Justin Jefferson is getting some hype, but, rookie wide receivers rarely come to the league and just light it up like crazy. So I don't trust that offense to allow him to get the opportunity to get enough points, because when you talk about these running backs and things like that, especially younger ones, you want them to be able to find the end zone. You have your outliers like Zeke or not necessarily Zeke, but like Saquon or Gurley when he was younger, where they were on crappy teams, but they're on another level of talent to where they can overcome the team around them. So, and I don't think Miles Sanders is on that level. So to have him above guys like Austin Eckler or even, Aaron Jones, Todd Gurley, or Leonard Fournette in redraft leagues, I think those players that have proven themselves year in and year out to be pretty valuable players, and they're able to find the end zone even with their teams not always being the best. Those are guys you have to look to get above a guy like Miles Sanders. I don't even know if the Philly offense is going to allow him just to be a feature back either. That offense has never allowed one running back to flourish, and I don't know why anyone would think that they would now. The coaching staff is still the same, and the talent around it is really not that great. So that's why I think Miles Sanders is ranked definitely too high here on this list. There's a lot of different guys I'd like that are below him. So what do you think, Brad?
I know their schedule looks pretty soft. You know, they have like one of the easiest schedules this upcoming season, potentially. Obviously, we don't know. The way that offense runs, I mean, they try to support so many players, but so many of them have gotten hurt. You know, so they dumped a lot of resources in the wide receivers in the offseason in the draft. But I still think Miles Sanders is probably, you know, the 1A and Jalen Reagor's 1B when it comes to their most talented offensive weapons. So outside of the tight ends, obviously. It's going to be interesting to see how they divvy up the workload. I think the reason that Miles Sanders gets kind of the love he gets is because I can see him getting a lot in the passing game out of the backfield because that offensive line tends to be a little leaky. You know, we know they've already got guys hurt on the offensive line. They had to re-sign 70-year-old Jason Peters. So, I could see Sanders getting work, but I could also see him being one of those guys. I don't own a share of Sanders, truth be told, because I don't want to pay for him, and he's not worth the price, and he's not worth the draft position. So I can't argue he's overrated for the price. So I agree, but I could see where he could have some value, and he's a very talented player.
Yeah, like in a better situation, I would like him a lot more.
I think where he's going, you know, when you're talking RB11, you're talking about him as a feature back, or as kind of the main guy, the guy who's going to, you know, maybe he's not the bell cow carrying the ball 300 plus times, but he's going to be in that neighborhood of 250 carries, and I don't see that happening. Not in the Doug Peterson offense. We talked last night on the Heat Seekers about Boston Scott and the upside that he has. I think that's true. I also brought up last night, there's still some free agent veteran running backs out there who I would not be at all surprised to see the Eagles sign and kind of go into the season as they've done the last few years with kind of a three-headed committee. I expect Miles Sanders to lead that committee, but I don't expect running back one numbers. Sully.
I'll start off by saying I have Miles Sanders at running back 8 currently in my redraft rankings. There's a massive caveat on that, and that is if they bring somebody else in, I'm definitely going to redo those rankings. So Doug Peterson doesn't really use a bell cow back. We've known that, but he hasn't really used a bell cow back from start to finish. But he certainly has in spurts. He had Josh Adams as a bell cow for about 3-week span. He used Jay Ajayi in periods where he was getting 20-plus touches a game. So they don't really have any options right now. Boston Scott is, I believe, a very undervalued piece in fantasy. Boston Scott's not going to carry the ball really that much. He's going to be a nice Darren Sproles scat back, catch the ball kind of guy. Alshon Jeffrey's likely looking at the pup list. Jalen Reagor's exciting, but he's raw. Deshawn Jackson, if he keeps talking, is going to get kicked off the team. There's not a whole lot of weapons there, again, other than those two incredibly talented tight ends. So Sanders, I believe, is going to get the work until they find someone to give it to. And to Brad's point earlier is last year when Jordan Howard was the primary ball carrier, Miles Sanders was still fantasy relevant because he was doing amazing things in the passing game. I don't think that goes away either. So as it sits right now, I really like Miles Sanders, and I probably would take him where he is. But, Rob, if they bring in Freeman or, I don't know, Lamar Miller or some other retread just to clog up that backfield, I don't like Sanders nearly as much.
All right, let's move into our honorable mention, guys. Kind of run through these quickly. Bryce, who'd you have as your number 3, your honorable mention guy this week?
Real quick, yeah, it was DK Metcalf. Last year he was ranked wide receiver. He ended up wide receiver 29. I'm looking at these rankings, and they just updated because there's a lot of players that are actually above him that were just below him. But they have him ranked at wide receiver 21 coming into this season. I think prior to that, he was ranked like wide receiver 18, above guys like Robert Woods, Keenan Allen, his teammate Tyler Lockett. That's just the main reason why I had him overvalued. Was those guys right there are proven to be good players that have put up consistent numbers. And DK Metcalf's only coming into his second year. He had a solid first year, but I don't expect him to make a huge leap this upcoming year. So that's why I thought he was ranked a little bit high, especially above some good veteran players.
Sully, thoughts?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I do struggle when I look at him and Lockett as to who to rank higher in that inside that Seattle offense. I struggle with that Seattle offense. If they ever let Russell Wilson be Russell Wilson, I like DK Metcalf a heck of a lot more. But I agree with Bryce. I'm not putting him ahead of some of those guys. So I'd agree. I think he's a little overvalued, but sort of more unknown than overvalued. But I agree.
Brad, anything on DK Metcalf?
Yeah, don't anybody talk bad about DK Metcalf. No. There's. I'm looking over the ADP, and there's 5 guys that I would take ahead of him. Well, 6 guys I'd take ahead of him. So I agree. Overrated.
The thing I like DK Metcalf, seeing him fall, that's good. I think if you're kind of going that no running back draft strategy, that he's a great guy to have as your wide receiver 3 or 4 at that point, and so that really makes a lot of sense because he could win you the league. But I don't know why you'd be doing that strategy this year after running back had its best year in almost a decade. I feel like it was a resurging year for running backs. So
I just did that draft strategy, and not on purpose, and I do not recommend it under any circumstances.
Sully, your honorable mention guy tonight.
It's Josh Jacobs. Running back 9 is his ADP. He's 14th overall. I like the player. My concern is the Raiders' additions to the offense that are going to catch the football, and it doesn't look like Jacobs is really going to be as involved in the passing game as I thought he was going to be. And last year, he carried the ball 120 times more than he ever did in a year in college. And he got hurt. So I'm a little concerned on whether or not he can hold up. I'm concerned about the guys that they brought in, be the Brian Edwards and Bowden. Just competition to catch the football. So I think it's a little bit rich in the top 10 at the ADP, but drop him down into the middle of the RB2 pack, and I really like him a lot more.
Not only that, they also re-signed Jalen Richard for some good money, the pass catching back. Honestly, if I had a choice sitting there on the clock and it was Miles Sanders or Josh Jacobs, I'd be going Miles Sanders, especially in PPR because he's got that pass catching ability. Brad, thoughts on Josh Jacobs?
Yeah, his inability to stay on the field for 16 games, I think, will be the thing that makes me not like him the most. Their schedule's a little softer this year, but they put a lot of investments into the wide receivers because John Gruden wants to throw the ball, so that's going to hurt somebody, I would think. And plus, they're going to be playing from behind because they're not ready yet for prime time. So I agree. Josh Jacobs is probably a little rich for our blood.
Bryce? Anything?
Yeah, I like Josh Jacobs. I thought he would come into this past year and be a good running back 2 value, which he proved to me. But being a running back 1 value, I don't think he's definitely there. I would choose him over Miles Sanders still, but like Brad just said, that offense isn't ready. They're still only one-dimensional. But if they can open up that pass game, I think that helps Josh Jacobs. But that's still up in the air, and that's not really something you have time to let play out when you're doing redraft.
And we just got. Okay, I'm gonna get to this in a moment. Let me get my last honorable mention guy in, and it's not guy, it's a group of guys. And it's the San Francisco 49ers defense. They're going at 108 in the ADP. That's the 9th round. Why? Defense is volatile. There's no reason to draft a defense before the final 3 rounds, preferably even the final round for me. It makes absolutely no sense. You're wasting roster space. You can get a much more valuable running back 5, wide receiver 5, something along those lines. Do not draft a defense that early. Brad, any thoughts on defense there?
Any redraft I've ever done, I've never taken a defense before the last 2 rounds. Defense and kicker are the last 2 things you take. So
100%.
Don't touch them. And typically I'm churning those defenses every couple of weeks anyway. So I agree. Definitely don't touch them in the 9th round. So
yeah, same thing. I don't care if it's 85 Bears. I'm not taking my defense until I think traditionally I take defense 2nd last round, kicker last round. No real reason to it other than that's probably the way I've always done it. There's just no reason not to. And to Brad's point, I am streaming that thing all year long in the leagues in which I have those positions. Bryce?
Right. It's usually last 3 rounds for me for a defense. I just look for a team that's not going to get me negative points if they can. So for a defense to go that high, it doesn't even seem like they get you that many points unless you're in some type of league. I'm in one league where defense scores way too many points. But, that just doesn't make sense to me.
And defenses historically from year to year in fantasy don't travel well, meaning they don't.
Right.
A defense that was really good one year, like the Patriots last year, probably won't score that way this year, or the Niners or the Bears didn't from year over year. So, yeah, that's a good call, Mr. Silvers. No point in doing that.
All right, and before we get into our questions tonight, we want to remind you to please like and subscribe on YouTube, and make sure you hit that notifications bell, both on YouTube and on rotoheat.com, so you get notified anytime something goes live. We've got daily live streams Monday through Friday on YouTube, and 2-3 articles coming out every day on rotoheat.com, so you want to stay on top of that. Sully and Brad, 2 of our most involved writers over there, pumping out that content all the time. There's also continuing news that started to surface a little bit this afternoon, but it's sounding like late tonight, tomorrow, there's going to be big news out of Washington, possibly besides a name change. Rumors flying around about ownership issues. Already 2 minority owners, talking about leaving, and looking at some things. Maybe a chance Dan Snyder could be selling his share of the team. So that would be kind of crazy. I'm not sure where to follow on that. I haven't been following it along too closely here this evening, but Washington Post was originally supposed to kind of have an expose that came out yesterday on what was going on behind closed doors with Washington. That's supposed to come out later tonight or tomorrow now. So big thoughts. Any thoughts there on what could be happening in Washington?
I just think it's a little crazy. I did hear a report that they terminated 2 high-ranking front office members on the weekend before they came out and officially mentioned that they're retiring the name. I don't have a lot of thoughts on it. To me, it's more of a political thing than it is a football thing. So I'll just let you guys chat about that.
Yeah, I think the name thing, is like you said, political. I think a change in ownership, especially 5 weeks from the start of the season, and all that uncertainty that could come, if that announcement's coming, that could be detrimental to any step forward Washington's looking to take, because you walk into an uncertain situation, even more uncertain than it's been, with Dan Snyder struggling as an owner as much as he has for the last 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, Twitter's kind of the place where a lot of this is dropping. John Gonzalez from ABC7 is reporting all sorts of stuff, and basically it comes down to a lot of really illegal type of decisions by Jay Gruden and a lot of the folks, and it looks like other league owners are just kind of fed up with Dan Snyder and the way he's running it. So if it's all true and all this is actual and factual, it could mean a change. I think it means Ron Rivera would be safe, because that guy's a pretty upstanding dude. But a change in ownership is you kind of been seeing it on the horizon for a while. I mean, Dan Snyder always seems to have people against him. He always seems to be kind of one of those divisive owners. So hopefully whatever happens, it's better for the Redskins organization, because that team is, they're one of those teams where everybody, I mean, they were huge for the longest time. Think of the 80s and Doug Williams, and they just had some really great teams, and all of a sudden they've just been bad for a long time. And I know bad, so.
So do I.
Bryce, what do you think, buddy? Obviously, you know nothing about any of this, being a Patriots guy.
Yeah,
but,
really.
From up on your perch, how do the rest of us lowlifes feel?
Well, down the poor Redskins, I forgot they even existed. No, I mean, the name change to me is you can't even have an opinion without everyone arguing, so I just refuse to have one anymore. But I feel like them changing owners would be good for the organization, because, like you just said, they've been bad for so long. So, it's not like it can really get much worse. So, how could changing organization and all that that front office, maybe a change in scenery would be good for them.
So Sully, you mentioned a couple of guys who were fired. Their director of pro personnel and assistant. were both fired over the weekend. Just this evening, it's come out that the voice of the Redskins is leaving the franchise. So their radio guy, he's been there, Larry Michael, for 16 years.
Wow.
And again, supposedly just the tip of the iceberg for what is to come later tonight. So I'm sure Brad and Paul will have some more information on the Devy Hour on that tomorrow. Even though that's a little bit out of their wheelhouse for that program, but it'll probably be some pretty big NFL news to talk about. Taking a look at questions. I don't know if any of you guys have Facebook up and have seen any there, but we did have a question here from Charles Rutley Jr. on a redraft PPR. Which side do you like in this trade? Side one is Stephon Diggs, Christian McCaffrey, Dwayne Haskins, and Evan Ingram, and Christian Kirk. So a lot of pieces there. Diggs, CMC, Haskins, Ingram, and Kirk.
Wow.
For Carr, Derek Carr, Kenyon Drake, Julio Jones, John Brown, and Dallas Goedert.
Yikes.
So lots of pieces, kind of a mega deal. It is a 16-team Superflex league and PPR. Thoughts
What was the
on
right
that,
side again?
Sully? The sides again are Stephon
Carr.
Diggs, Christian McCaffrey, Haskins, Ingram, and Christian Kirk. For Derek Carr, Kenyon Drake, Julio Jones, John Brown, and Dallas Goedert.
CMC side easily.
Yeah.
The other side seems like it's kind of aging guys other than Goddard. That really feels kind of lopsided to me to the CMC Dig side.
It is a redraft as well, so it's not a dynasty trade. So I don't know if that changes on the age thought, Brad.
No, not at all. I mean, because when you look at guys like Diggs and CMC and some of those pieces on that side, they're all going to be high producers this year. So unless you're getting those guys, I don't know why you'd be trading all of those pieces away.
I'm on the CMC side of that trade as well, and that's first of all a big boy trade. There's a lot of pieces in there. When I look at the thing that jumps out to me the most is when I look at trades like that, I try to figure who has the best player in the trade. So McCaffrey is head and shoulders the best player in this trade. Diggs and Brown might cancel themselves out. Goddard and Ingram might do that themselves. I like Christian Kirk. I like Stephon Diggs. Julio's going to be great as well. And John Brown, we don't really know what type of role he fills. So based on the fact that it looks like it's even number of players for even number of players, and McCaffrey's worth like 1.5 players himself, I'm with Brad. I'm on the McCaffrey side rather easily here.
Bryce, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. The way I look at redraft trades is a little bit different than how I look at dynasty trades, is where dynasty, I like to make sure I'm kind of set for the future as well. So if I make a trade, I like my starters to be – I'll take a hit in my starting lineup if it means that I have some potential for the future. Where in redraft, I look what makes my starting lineup better. And the Diggs and CMC side, those two players, I feel like make my side better if I'm losing, Drake, Jones, and Goddard and Carr. First of all, Carr, unless it's a super flex, Carr's probably not a starting quarterback. Goddard, I'm not real huge on him, so I don't have him as a starting, one of my starting tight ends that I'm targeting. Ingram could possibly be a starting tight end. So to me, it looks like and I know it's 16 teams, so it looks like one side's getting Diggs, McCaffrey, Ingram, and even maybe Kirk that they could plug into their lineup, and the other side that might just be getting like Drake and Jones as like real starters in their lineup, and then Goddard.
Being a super flex, I'm wondering if the team trading CMC doesn't feel like Haskins is too weak to be their QB2, which is possible. But again, you got to remember, super flex, you don't always have to start a QB in that second spot. I mean, it's probably the most beneficial. Obviously, I think Carr's got better one-year value than Haskins, but I think for me, 4 of the top 6 guys in this 10-player trade are on the CMC side. I'd go CMC, Julio. That's one from each side. But then Diggs, Ingram, and Kirk, I'd put them all ahead of Carr, John Brown, and Goddard as far as value. I think if Ingram stays healthy, he can be a top tight end. He's shown it. He's just got to stay on the field. Christian Kirk's going to have good value. Diggs has been good. A little bit of maybe that cancellation Brad talked about with John Brown, but I still think Diggs is the better wide receiver. I think this is a team looking to – I feel like this is a team looking to try to upgrade their QB2, but you're just giving away too much for a Derek Carr. I mean, if you're trying to get a second quarterback, I mean, that's a hell of a package. You should be getting a lot more than Derek Carr, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Is Delvin Cook a fade in redraft? He said the H word. That's from Jason, one of our guys over at Roto Heat. Thoughts there, Brad? You're shaking your head. Fading Delvin Cook?
Yeah, I'm a big Cook guy, at least this year for sure. I mean, that offense is still in flux, and I think they're going to have to lean on Cook quite heavily.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, he said the holdout word. He talked about that. But you got to imagine his people are smart enough to tell him that under this new CBA language, he has to show up to camp.
Yeah.
Right.
He has to. If you don't show up to camp, your contract doesn't toll, and he's in the same spot he is next offseason.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some of the language is kind of confusing, and there seems to be some belief out there that he could show up to camp and then refuse to play once the regular season rolls around, which in turn then becomes a holdout. But his contract would still toll at that point, making him a restricted free agent next year. So, but whether the specifics of that are true or not, he's got to trust his people to tell him what's the right way to go. And I feel like he's going to get told, you got to go to camp.
Yeah, as the Vikings guy in the room, I would say that Brad kind of pointed to it earlier, is the defense is a mess, and the Vikings are going to need to move the ball down the field and throw the football down the field, I should say, a little bit more than they have in the past. Justin Jefferson's cool and all, and Irv Smith is as well, but there's not a whole lot of options there. So Dalvin's probably he could be targeted 100 times out of the backfield this year, in addition to his workload. So I don't think he's a fade. I don't think he's holding out. I wouldn't worry about it personally.
All right. Anybody seen on Facebook? Do we have any questions over there?
I didn't see anything there. Let me take another look. Doesn't look like it, boss.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap things up here. Thank you, Brad, for joining us tonight. Where can people find you, Brad?
Everywhere. At Roto Heat Brad. You can find me in the Facebook community, the Discord chats. If you're connected to Roto Heat, you probably know where I'm hiding at. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you for being on. And, of course, you'll be on again tomorrow night. You got the Devy Hour. What's your topic tomorrow night?
We're going to be talking about the top Devy offensive players. So now that we're past all the nuts and bolts of Devy, we're getting into the fun stuff, talking people.
Nice.
Cool.
All right. Sully, where can we find you, and final thoughts for tonight?
The usual places, at Roto Heat Sully on Twitter, both Dynasty Facebook community and the Redraft Facebook community. I host a little podcast called Sully's 2 Cents, fantasy football podcast that drops on Fridays. And Discord. We can't Discord. It's a great platform, and I'm in there as at Sully. And my final thoughts are just glad to be here, guys. It was another fun show. Great to have Brad with us. And I'm really looking forward to the season and continuing this on.
All right. Bryce, how about you?
You can find me on the Facebook community, either the Redraft or the Dynasty Roto Heat, or the Discord. Feel free to ever shoot me a message, on either Discord or Facebook. And like Sully said, I'm definitely excited for this season, and it's good that we're getting many opinions of why we're not always agreeing, and it's always good to get both sides of the argument, so everyone gets kind of the full spectrum.
All right, and then I just want to remind everybody, go to Facebook, the Roto Heat Facebook Dynasty Facebook community, also the Redraft Facebook community. If you're watching on YouTube, again, like and subscribe, hit that notification bell. We've got those live streams every night. We've got lots of great content at rotoheat.com. We got the Discord again, rotoheat.com/Discord. Join that and interact with all the great guys we've got working on stuff at rotoheat.com. And you can find me on Twitter, at RotoHeatRob. Next week on the Fantasy Inferno, Sully and Bryce are going to be leading the charge, talking about breakout candidates, and we'll hopefully have another guest to join them as I will be out of town. But thank you all for listening to another episode